Here we go. Hi, everyone. Hi, Patty. They tell me from the back end that we have 16 people, organizers included, so that's nice. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a nice Friday, and I hope you're ready for this chat. Today we are talking about finding the right tech partner. And what that even means, we'll find out soon. So, for those who don't know who I am, hi, my name is Tin Geber. I am originally from Croatia, but I grew up in Italy, in Rome, and I'm currently in the Netherlands, in The Hague. By the way, I'm also known for speaking very fast. So if I do start to speak very fast, which I do when I get excited, please write it in the chat. Write anything, big capital letters. Slow down. And I'll do my best. I just prefer doing workshops when I can actually physically see people because talking to a screen is not the same thing. But we're 6 people, so I'm imagining all of you sitting in my living room and looking at me right now. Okay, I have two hats. The main one is my job as a social innovation specialist with a Dutch-based international NGO called HIVOS. Basically what I do is I try to figure out the best ways for HIVOS to maximize their experimentation so that they can find new and innovative ways to further their mission and vision. HIVOS works mostly on humanist rights, from freedom of expression to sexual rights and diversity, all the way to sustainability and environmental rights. And we have 15 people in the Russian room. Hello, everyone. So that's one hat. The other hat is that of a computational artist, which means that I do art, but with computers, and have lots of fun doing this. And you can find out a little bit more about that on my website. That's tin.fyi. Okay, let's get started. By the way, I'm always checking the chat. So if at any moment you want to ask questions or point out something or have a comment, just write it down and I will jump into it. I much prefer interactive rather than, monologuing. So yeah, if at any moment you want to dive deeper into something, just let me know. Quick vanity card. This is a selection of groups that I worked with in the past decade, and most of my work has always been that of, in a nutshell, a tech translator. So skills are that of a wonderful generalist, in that I know a bit about a lot. So I have found myself working a lot with groups that were trying to understand how to incorporate technology into their advocacy or activism, but didn't know where to start and how even to do this. So I have, lots of experience figuring out how to best make connections between technologists, non-technologists, helping, plan strategies around whether to use tech and how to use it, when it makes sense, when it doesn't make sense, and so on. Oh, by the way, this webinar is meant to last, my presentation is meant to last, let's say, more or less an hour, even less. We ask you to be here for 1/1.5 hours, which is mostly because I would like to have time to take questions and just have a chat about anything that you might have found interesting or confusing or want to know more. I won't ask you if that makes sense. I will assume that it does. We will move on. Apologies. So you and I will have 2 webinars together. This one, the first one is focused on finding the right tech partner, and the second one will be focused on working with tech service providers. So in a way, this is how can we prep so that we can find the right partner. And the second one will be more, once we do have a tech partner, what should we know so that our work together is going the best it can. Today we are going to cover these 4 points here, starting from lost in translation. Then we will talk about what it means to know what we want to do, the importance of doing homework, and the last part will be something that sounds really boring, but it's actually really cool. How to write an amazing request for proposals, or RFP. A quick round of hands. Can you write in the chat if you never heard of a request for proposals or an RFP? Okay, I'm assuming the English room knows, which is wonderful. 5, 6 pluses in the Russian room. Okay, good. Well, we will talk about it later, so that's great. And I would also assume that even if you haven't heard of the term request for proposals, then it still might mean that you have done it, but you just called it differently. So there's no plan still for working with tech service providers. You will get that soon. So let's move on. Let's start with lost in translation, and let's play a tiny game. So now I want to ask all of you to write in the chat not what you see in terms of what animal, there you go, not what you see in terms of an animal, Patty, but in terms of what features do you see of the animal that you are seeing. Tell me, do you see, I don't know, hair, eyes, whatever. And taking time, yeah, okay, we have ears. What else? We have an eye, a mouth, more eyes. We have a nose, we have a neck. We have wind, why not? We have a smiley face. A frightened rabbit and a lovely hungry duck. We have a tongue, interesting. I also see a beak. A beak is the duck's nose / mouth. Oh, Silva went meta. She sees a picture. George, what do we have in the Russian room? Black stripes on a white canvas. Beak, eyes, ears. Perfect. I love how some of you went meta, went Magritte on this. This is not a pipe, which was great. Yeah, this is a famous drawing that is an optical illusion that most of you have seen already, which can be a rabbit and can also be a duck, depending on points of view. It's duck rabbit or rubber duck. Go and translate that, George. And but the interesting thing here is that if we try to describe what we see without saying it's a rabbit or it's a duck, we can have a list of features of what we are seeing that perfectly they all perfectly describe what we are seeing, but at the end it can result in a rabbit or in a duck. And so you can have two different groups talking about features of a thing that they think is the same, but at the end, when the end product comes out, you were expecting a rabbit and you get a duck. And then you say, wait a second, why is that a duck? And the person on the other side will say, well, that's what you asked me to do. To tell you, I have a great example for this. So, but before we go there, this is, a quick why this is a problem and where this problem comes from is that what we understand is limited by the expertise that we have. We know too much about certain things, and therefore we assume a lot about those things. Our understanding is limited by our experience. What we learned in the past will definitely define what we understand as possible or impossible or a rabbit or a duck. Our bias, whether it's implicit or explicit, also modifies what we expect. We expect, I don't know, I would expect, I'm from Croatia, so, all the stories about the lazy Balkans, or I would expect an Italian to be less precise or something like that. All of these things, even if they're not explicit, they are there. We have them as our cultural makeup. And surfacing those is really important to understand where we come from. And of course, our expectations. What we expect to see will color what we will actually see in the end. All of this is the Dunning-Kruger effect, because I have no physical way of switching your hands up. But if you have heard of it, please write it in the chat. The Dunning-Kruger effect is one of the most wonderful, relatively recent discoveries. And it comes from these two scientists, Mr. Dunning and Mr. Kruger, who have read this story, and this is true, the story in the newspaper of a man who went to rob a bank and was caught because he was recorded on cameras, because he wasn't wearing a mask. When he was asked, why didn't you wear a mask? He said, well, I covered my face with lemon juice. And then they said, but why did you cover your face with lemon juice? And he said, well, that's what you make invisible ink from. So I was assuming it will hide my face as well. And Mr. Dunning and Mr. Kruger said, this can't be possible. How on earth has he thought about, that thing might be possible? And so they started analyzing and researching how much people's knowledge of things reflects on people's confidence in that knowledge. And what they found out is the lower knowledge in a certain field is, the higher the confidence of your strength of that knowledge. And the more you learn about something, the less confident you become, until you come all the way to the other side, where your confidence is going back up once your knowledge becomes relatively high, but it never gets as high as it was when you didn't know that much. And also, I like this graph specifically because the rightmost point says, trust me, it's complicated, which is, I'm sure, something that you have heard from especially technologists in many occasions. Hi, Elena, welcome. When you would ask for clarifications and they would be like, oh, listen, it's complicated. And, the truth is, it is complicated because probably some explanation will take them, I don't know, a full day to try to explain. This, yeah, there you go, Anna. Exactly. The problem is, it feels, our side, it feels like lacking the knowledge, the depth of the knowledge that a technologist has. It is really hard to understand why it's complicated. And it's also hard to just simply blindly trust somebody, especially if we are all to the left. So we are in the space of thinking that we know everything, right? That is the way why last year I went back to school. I went to do a Master's of Arts in Computational Arts, because I really wanted to learn enough about computer science to be able to be in a space where I can say, I can really understand Why is it so complicated? And yeah, that one, no, it is officially your problem and everybody else's problem. It is a fact of life. The more you learn, the less confident you are. There is a famous author from the UK called Ben Goldacre. He writes about a lot. He's a doctor, and he writes a lot about bad news pieces on pharma. Stuff like researchers found out that if you, I don't know, eat grapes every morning, your hair will grow blue. And one of his latest books is called, I think you'll find it's more complicated than that. The point the book is making is that once you get to the actual knowledge, it becomes really complicated to explain it, especially if we link it to our the current news cycle, the quickness of absorption of information that we are used to. There's very rarely space to actually go and understand why things are complicated. Yeah. Any questions about this? I'm seeing from the comments that it resonates, which makes me happy. Cool. I'm going to head on. And also, it's also important to remember that, for example, when working with technologists, this works the other way around as well. They don't understand what oh, sorry, George. Yes, go ahead. No worries. George is having a sound problem. Just let me know when we can start again. If anyone just joined, we are having a mini sound problem on the Russian room side, and we are waiting for George to let us know how things are going. And in the English room, we currently have 24 people. Let's see if we can get to 30. Call your friends. Yes, hear me? Hello, hello. George, I am talking. I am talking, George. Oh, so the Russian room can hear me through your headphones, which I assume is not good because they should not be hearing me, they should be hearing you. Okay, fixed. Excellent. Now we're back. Okay, the Russian room was hearing both myself and George speaking, which must not have been a lot of fun for them. But we are back. Okay, let's see. Mariam says, thanks for being invited. Oh, you're welcome. And if you're having a meeting in Tbilisi, I would love to come as well. I mean, I can't, but I would love to come because you guys have the best food in the world. Okay. So the point of the Dunning-Kruger effect is, yes, we have all seen this happen, with technologists, but it's also important to remember it works the other way around as well. Partners that we work with don't have the depth of knowledge that we have in our issues, but also, in a way, sometimes, civic activism or, working in the social good is something that people might feel like they're confident enough because they understand the concepts. Oh, you're activists, you protest against something, right? So there's always, this difference approach. The Dunning-Kruger effect works both ways. That's why it's so important to make sure that, we kind of try as much as possible to define what we mean. And especially in the technologist area, some of you might have seen this comic. This is one of my favorite. It is really hard in computer science to explain the difference between the easy and the virtually impossible. I know George translated this for the Russian group, and you all can read it here. And this is exactly it. It's sometimes really hard, and it's hard to understand how to accept that, something that it doesn't feel like should be like a big chunk of work actually is a big chunk of work, which again requires trust and understanding and dialogue. This comic, by the way, comes from a wonderful website called XKCD. Highly recommended, very. But let me give you an example. Story time. Some years ago, 6 years ago, more or less, I was called to participate in an emergency meeting of a group of organizations, NGOs, that just launched this website. It was a website that collected information on all the large-scale land acquisitions from across the world. So information about who is buying massive chunks of land, where, and for what. It was a website that was meant to kind of point a spotlight on the land grab phenomenon. So they launched this website, and it didn't go that well. Big, experts in the field started writing really negative reviews of the website on the same day of the launch about how the numbers were all wrong, and how some of the land deals, land acquisitions that were presented on the website have failed. They never went through, and therefore they shouldn't be there because they're just don't exist, right? And so the first problem was, so I was in this meeting. We had some partners on the phone, some people are sitting there. The developers were somewhere in Berlin. And the first thing that they asked me was, Tim, can we fix this real fast? And I said, well, I assume so. Does the website have some sort of an editor, some sort of a space where we can go in and change the data? And they said, we don't know. So they called the developers and said, do we have an editor to change the data on the website? And the developers said, no, you never asked us for that. You just gave us the data set and told us, can you make it pretty and can you visualize it? So first lost in translation moment right there. The practitioners, the NGOs didn't know to ask for something like that, because they didn't know it wasn't simply assumed to be there. And the developers obviously didn't just do, extra 2 weeks of work just because it would be nice. Problem number one, fixed in a crazy night of coding between myself and a friend of mine. Basically, we developed, we hacked PHP files to be able to delete, deals on the fly. The second problem is, then the larger problem was how did these failed deals land on this platform? Why are they there? So, the NGOs ask the people who were running this database, who were cleaning this data, they were like, didn't we agree that only verified deals go on the platform? And the database team says, well, yeah, of course, all the deals on the platform are verified. And then they say, but what do you mean? We know that there is this, for example, this one famous deal on the website that we all know has failed, never went through. So why is it there? And the answer from the data analysts was, well, we have verified that it failed, so it went on the website. So at that moment, there was a moment of icy silence in the room when everybody was understanding what happened. The fact that there was a fundamental misunderstanding between what verified means and what successful means. And long story short, the website went down that day, and then we spent the next 6 months completely redesigning it to put it online in its current form. It's actually still online, and it's still, I think, the only platform online with large-scale land deals visualized. So that's something. But all of this was basically simply the lack of knowing how to talk in specific ways that other groups in the partnership could understand. And so the first step that we need to do, clearly, when we understand that how important, figuring out where we are being lost in translation is, the first step that we need to do is we need to define well. The part of the defining well is the most important part, and it comes way before we even start talking to any tech provider. If we want a quick and clear checklist of what it means to define well, the most high level, most kind of important things you can do are these 3 steps. What is your main objective? And you should be able to write it short, concise, and clear. What do you want the tool to actually accomplish, and how will that contribute to your objective? And, who will actually use the tool? You talked about personas already, I know. So the question is, who will use it? Why would they want to use it, and why not? And also, what would prevent them from using it? That is the first step. And I'll be moving along fairly quickly on some of the more complicated slides, because I'm assuming that you will have we will share all these slides with you, so you can always copy them later. But when we define, the objective, what's really important is to always remember that we are never talking about a tool. We are always talking about a need. Even if, for example, I say I need a website for myself, I don't really need a website. What I need is a place to put my blog, right? I need a place where people see my work. I need a place to show off the latest project. Maybe you don't even need the website. Maybe for your specific use case, it's better to, I don't know, set up an installation somewhere, or organize a conference. A website is one of the possible tools that you might need for your need, right? Same thing, some examples, like we need an app, or like we need a monitoring app. We don't need a monitoring app. We need to find the best way for our audience to monitor something. And if it's an app, great, but it doesn't have to be. The most important message here is to always make sure to put the need first and the tool later, because putting tools first means that we are limited by the abilities of the tool, and then therefore our needs get constrained by the tool. And probably the biggest, most fun exercise you can do for any of the projects, and this is nothing specifically, relevant, or it's nothing specific to this webinar, but this is more in general. Make sure you sit down and list all of the assumptions you have behind any kind of project that you want to do, especially when it's a project that involves skills and expertise that you don't have internally. I want to make a website. I'm assuming that the people that I care about will actually want to go on that website. I'm assuming that I have the expertise in-house to maintain that website, to keep it fresh. I'm assuming that spending more on the website will give me greater visibility, spending more on, I don't know, leaflets and people giving out information. Listing out those assumptions is really, 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 really important, because then you can give those assumptions also to your tech service provider as well. Okay, so if we first defined well what we want to do, then still before going to talk to the tech service providers, we can do our homework by ourselves. Which means, again, checklist number one, we can first try to describe in detail what we want this tool to do, and we'll see a little bit more about this later. We can already do a research of the existing tools out there. It's, honestly, there are so many tools in so many different areas that most of the most important information is 10 minutes of Googling away. That is, I have been part of some research that was looking into how NGOs choose the tools they use, and it was surprising how many didn't do the first step of Googling whether what they want to do actually exists already, and then reinventing the wheel. Another thing that's really important to ask around. It is, there's a high chance that some people you have worked with already have tried what you would like to build. They will have lots of experience already that will be useful for you. Doesn't matter if they failed or succeeded. They have thought about it. They have probably talked to technologists about it. There's a lot of information you can glean, you can learn by talking to colleagues or partners about those similar projects. And sometimes it's, this is actually where I wanted to mention also why these types of webinars are really important, why conferences are really important, because on conferences you will find those people and people who weren't in your networks, and you can just grab them for a coffee and be like, hey, can you please talk me through what you did, because I want to do something like this and I have no idea where to start. And the last step is, what could go wrong? Sitting down and actually trying to map out the risks of that project, of the unintended consequences of that project, sometimes might even bring you to the point of saying, maybe we shouldn't do this because the risks outweigh the gains. And unfortunately, there are many, many stories like that of, projects with good intentions that had very negative results in the end. One really good example is in the UK, there was a group, an NGO, that created an online map of all the schools in the UK, and they gave votes. They gave kind of grades, 5 stars, 4 stars to each school. And they would show why a certain school is better than another, and so on. And they did because they wanted to help parents choose the right school for their child. And because they were thinking this way we will, education will be better. The problem is that the metrics that they were using to measure whether a school was good or not was actually, in some cases, linked to some problems that the school had no control over. For example, schools in the UK get less money if they have less students. They get less money if their grades are lower. And it can really easily become a vicious cycle that when students you start getting less students, you will get less money. Less money means that you can't attract the best teachers, so you get second-rate teachers, which means the grades go down, which means more students leave the school, and at the end, it just keeps spiraling down. And they basically noticed that happening after, I think, a year or two that the website was online. They noticed that they were doing more harm than good, and very publicly shut down their website and apologized for the thing that they did. They thought they were doing something good, but they understood that they were actually reinforcing the inequalities that were already existing in schools. If you're interested in this story, write it in the comments. A friend and colleague of mine wrote a really good article about this, and I can share it with you. I'll have to find it, but it's really good. So, moving on. Very strong point. Service providers will not know what is best for you. They will know what is the most efficient way of building something. They will know what is the fastest way of building something. They probably, out of 10, they will have some sort of understanding of the commercial aspects of a good website, of a good tool. That doesn't necessarily translate into NGO land, into activist land. We don't look for the same incentives. So therefore, acknowledging this is very important, because we are the ones who need to bring to the tech service providers what we think is best for us, and then have a conversation about this. But do please remember this. They just simply don't know. Some organizations do. There's a growing number of tech service providers that actually work very specifically with civil society that know this better. But they are not that many still. And usually they are way overworked. A good place to start looking is obviously the Code for All network that has partners in most countries in the world. In case you are unfamiliar, this is the Code for All. And so, go back to the features. What does it mean to make a detailed features list? In a nutshell, it means sitting down, imagining yourself in front of, oh, good, Dennis, thank you. I will share the link later. Making a list of features means sitting down and basically building a fantasy in your head. You sit down and you imagine yourself in front of your platform, and then you imagine yourself interacting with that platform, whatever the tool is that you want to build, right? And you try to go into as many details as you can in describing how you engage with your tool. And do remember, there's no insignificant details. Many times we will think, well, it's normal to have a login, or it's normal to have, an editor of our land deals. But, from a technical perspective, it's not. It's added work. So very clearly specifying that is actually really important. An example. We need a database that includes basic information about our volunteers. This is a list of features, a very short one, but it gives a good example. And it's also split between essential, the must-haves, desirables, which means, the good-to-haves, desirables, and then the nice-to-haves. That's, in the future, it would be great to have it, not really critical at all. And so, in here, the essentials are really clear. We need a field for a person's name, a field for an address, a field for a telephone number, and a field for a job description. It's like that's the level of detail that is necessary to make sure that we actually cover all the features well, because we kind of never know what part of what we are assuming might actually be massively hard or impossible or way expensive. So designing features as detailed as possible means that whoever is the tech service provider that's talking to you, they will know to walk you through those features or go through the features together and be able to say, I hear what you're trying here, but just so you know, if we do want to go with that, that will take us weeks, or we think this is a better solution. But describing as much as possible in detail of what you want this to do is really, really important. Do remember, this initial feature list will definitely not be your final feature list. You will 100% change it, even radically. Why? Because simply there are some things, or many things, that you simply cannot know at this point that you will need. So yes, it needs to be detailed, but also nothing of this is set in stone. All of this can change. Why also it's really important to test with your users and so on, but that's for another webinar. We won't go into human-centered design right now. And so for our last step, write an amazing request for proposals. What is a request for proposals? I'm sure many of you have done it. So like in a basic nutshell, it is the thing that you publish on your website or you send over email to many different tech service providers that explains what exactly you want to build. So far, so boring. And in fact, if you look, these are kind of the standard 7 things to go into an RFP. A classic, number 1, obviously you want whoever is reading it to know what you do and who you are. Number 2, a description of the whole project, like where does this tool fit? Number 3 is the most important one. We'll come back to it later. Then you have budget, milestones and deadlines, any additional questions that you may think of. This is a very, frequently asked questions part. And obviously who they can call and by when they need to submit. All of these points should be there. Please remember, giving a budget is really, really, really important. Defining milestones helps. This can change, but for tech service providers, knowing whether they need to think in terms of 3,000 euro or 30,000 euro changes radically what they can bring. But the most important bit is number 3. What are project requirements and project objectives? It's literally everything we talked about until now. Your project requirements, your project objectives are how you defined your platform, your need, how you designed your features, how you thought about the risks. All of everything we talk about today can go inside there. The more you put there, the better you will find the match with the tech service provider. So where to start with a good RFP? Another thing before we go into the resources, what I like about the RFP is that it's a boring document, but in reality, it's a great moment for you to really, really think through the story of your of whatever you want to build. So I think the RFP is more important to us than to the service provider. It is your moment to write something that when you look at it, you're like, yes, that is what I want to do. Also, it makes it really clear what I don't want to do. So the RFP is more important for you than for the tech service provider in the first place. It's very important for them as well, obviously. So if you do want to play with some RFPs, requests for proposals, there are some really good resources out there. The first one is Alidad. It is an online interactive tool that guides you through the questions like the ones that we talked about today, and helps you think through them with good examples, with good quotes, and it's really smartly done. Spoiler alert, and also what's the word? Full disclosure, I worked on this, so obviously I'm proud of my baby. But it's really, really useful. Unfortunately, it's only in English for now. I did some tests, and Google Translate does do a good job in translating the page into Russian. But when I say does a good job from my perspective of a non-Russian speaker. So take that with a grain of salt. But in general, it's a really, really good tool. Another really good place is TechSoup. Has a page on their website that's called the RFP Library. And they have a bunch of templates, ready-made templates of how other NGOs have done requests for proposals. It's actually a really good step to just, take something and, you have the structure. It's already done in whatever Word or PDF or whatever format that you would want, and just starts from there. For those who don't know, TechSoup has been working with supporting NGOs with technology across the globe for decades. And there's also TechSoup Europe, based in Poland. I would, if you don't know about them, I would suggest to Google them, because they do offer lots of free services for activists and civil society, like, you know, free licenses for your software and free training. And they are a decent bunch. And this is slightly different. This is a UK, let's say, tech service provider consultancy for civil society. They published the way they work through projects with NGOs, with charities in their case. So it's an interesting place to look at this kind of process from the other side. It's really well done, and I recommend that one as well. And now for the last slide, and it's 15 minutes to the full hour. We are great. Homework. Yes, you get homework. I told you about Alidad. I would like you to go on alidad.tech and complete step 1 and step 2. You will see at the end of step 2, there's a big button that says download the PDF, which will let you download the PDF with all the information you entered. And then you take that PDF and you send it over to us. For the non-English speaking group, I was talking to George earlier, and George said that we are at your disposal to help you with the translation if the Alidad Google Translate doesn't work that well. Obviously, you are free to write into the system in whatever language you prefer. And that's it for my presentation. I feel like I talked at you for way long. I am now happy to take any of your questions. Keep in mind, we have time. So I am free until 1:30, which is, I think for you it's 2:30. I'm here for 45 more minutes, right? And you can leave whenever you want. We said that this will last an hour to an hour and a half. So yeah, I'm open for questions. Let's see. Dear Tin, will you be in offline trainings? Unfortunately not. And my name is Tin with an I, like Rin Tin Tin. But no, I won't be there. I would have loved to, though. But if you do want to get in touch at any moment, that's not a problem. I've been called literally everything. Tim, Pin. Somebody called me Pin one time. If you do want to get in touch with me, this is me on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. If you want to reach out, just do. As they say, my DMs are open. You can write to me and ask me anything at any time. Take your time. We have time. Patty asks, who are you sending the assignments to? Yes, via email. Monica, what do you suggest? Which email should they send the assignments to? In the meantime, I found the link to the story about the schools. I just linked it into the chat, and it's called Should Schools Be Closed? Learning from Schooloscope, an Open Data Post-Mortem. Written by Israeli activist Mushon Zeraviv, whom I warmly suggest you follow because he is pretty cool. Oh, a role-playing game project for human rights activists. Yes, absolutely. So let me see if I can find. Interestingly enough, the question is really particularly right. One of my partners on this project was Mushan that I just talked about, which is also so interesting because we didn't work on that many projects. So I guess there's it's a sign. Yes. So Amnesty International and another couple of groups have joined together to create what they're calling Panic Button. I'm finding the links right now. Unfortunately, at this moment, the itself has been retired. They understood that basically it was an app that you could use on Android to protect yourself. Let's say you are human rights activist protesting and the police grabs you, or some paramilitary grabs you and takes you away. The Panic Button app was designed so that you can activate it by clicking really fast on the power button. And what the Panic Button app would do is it would send out SMS messages with your geolocation to the 4 people you put into as your pact, what they're called, your Panic Button Action Group. Yes, Mariam, we will share this presentation with everybody. And so, really, what happened with the Panic Button is they said, hey, Panic Button is, it's a tool, but the most important part of the Panic Button is training people to be ready to use it, because it is, it's actually like it can be dangerous even to have this app. And so, what we developed was a training kit. There we go. Let's see if I found the link. And it is also on GitHub. There we go. It should be here. Opening it up right now. Wonderful. Found it. It's called the Pact Kit. I'm linking it into the chat right now. And it is basically a package of interactive trainings to work with human rights activists to help them understand how to work on their physical and digital security. As if you open the link, you will see there are a couple of different courses like risk mapping, designing your group of your trusted group, creating your action plan, and so on. What you are interested in is the card called Impact, which is the specific role-playing name that has been tested out in a bunch of occasions with actual human rights defenders in Indonesia, in the Philippines, and I think Tanzania. And if you want to know more about this, it is here. Okay, then we have a question from Anna. Any good examples of good interactive maps for people with disability? A clarifying question. Do you mean interactive maps of areas for people to, where spaces are enabled for disabled people? Or do you mean maps that disabled people can use? Good point. Honestly, I don't know. I can do some research, but there's no good example that comes to on top of my head. You're welcome. at least 2 more questions. Awesome. We have 1 more Russian question. If your question is whether my coffee is cold, yes, it's cold. I need to make more coffee. How to download PDF? Mariam, you mean on alidad.tech? Mariam, if you mean how to download the PDF on alidad.tech, once you start filling it in, once you finish a step, then there's a button that says download the PDF. You just click on it and it downloads with all the information you entered. George, the question about why this platform was chosen webinar, I don't have an answer to that. That is a question for the organizers. As far as I know, this is a Big Blue Button is one of the rare, good enough open source solutions for stuff like this. Anna, the game, you mean Impact game? No, the game specifically had only offline. It was designed to be only offline. It was designed to also use the Panic Button app during the role-playing game, but in reality, it doesn't need it. It was designed to be as often as possible. And when developing similar tools, do I expect people to be tech savvy? No, I usually don't. I usually try to design things that require the least amount of tech. And like the tech that I'm happiest with is a pen and a paper. But what I usually try to do is talk to the communities and learn about the people that I was designing something for before I go in. So in the case of the Impact game for Amnesty International, Amnesty itself already did the groundwork of talking to all their human rights defenders. So we already knew what was their, their technical savviness level. Interesting, Anna. So what is an ideal homework before going to Georgia? In my mind, the homework that I'm giving you here is mostly for my second webinar, not specifically for Georgia. However, in my mind, this is totally my personal feeling, this homework will be good for you in any case. It is a good process to go through. Outside of this webinar, just generally, it's a good process to go through. And I honestly wouldn't suggest more unless you want to go through the entire Alidad, which is already there, because the step 3 is about testing ideas with your users, with your communities. And when I say testing, I don't mean, coding an app, testing the ideas. Dennis, if there are similar sites like alidad.tech, but on Russian, unfortunately, not as far as I know. Although I do think that Alidad has been translated into some languages. Give me a second. And also, one other thing that I would really recommend you to do is to write to Alidad. There's an email on the website on the bottom. There's a send us feedback. If you do express interest in having this translated, it is actually really easy to translate. All of this is on, it's on GitHub, and they're just text files. So if you express interest, I think people will be happy to know. but I was skipping a question, the second part of the question from Anna. Examples of gamification projects. That is a big question. I can come back to this because I have a bunch of books about how to use experiential learning for courses. I usually use experiential learning rather than gamification because gamification sometimes turns some people off because they think games are for children. And to them, I say we all play games all our lives, but experiential learning gets kind of the point across better because the idea is that you learn from experience. Anna, I will take a note for myself and come back to you with some good starting points for reading, if that is helpful. Thank you, Anna. I'm grabbing your email. I guess I got 2 questions, but one wasn't for me. So you owe me, group, you owe me one more question. And if I don't get it, we are just staying here until I get it. We're not, of course. I'm kidding. You can go away if you want, but don't. Okay. George, anything from the Russian room? Great. People, I know this was a big download. There was a bunch of stuff here. I'm very happy that you came to this webinar. I hope this was useful for you. I'm looking forward to your homework. And thank you, Monica. And if you have any other questions, again, this is where you can find me. If you want to write me an email, this is my email. And go and enjoy your Friday and have a great weekend. Ooh, recordings of the webinar. Oh, shout out back to the Russian chat. Thank you all, and thank you, George, for translating everything.